A week or so ago, we had actor Shellen on our show, and he shared some personal stories with us. We started to get into the subject of him being targeted, but that subject is so huge and encompasses so much, we needed more time to get into that. So we have Stephen back with us today, and he brought a very special guest with him to also speak about targeting. Dr. John Hall is a medical doctor who was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and he is the author of 2 books. His latest is titled A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America. He's a board-certified diplomat of the American Board of Anesthesiology and a member of the American Academy of Pain Medicine. He's also an active member of the Mind Science Foundation, dedicated to the study of human consciousness. He sits on the medical committee of the human rights organization Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. Welcome to the show, Stephen Shellen and Dr. John Hall.
All right.
Hi, guys.
Hey, by the way, Stephen, that was a much larger introduction than yours.
I know. Well, Dr. John has a lot more credits. I was just a dumb actor writer.
Just not on IMDb. Mine are. I don't have enough on IMDb.
We got to get you a Wikipedia set up.
So in all seriousness, so yeah, we touched on it last week, and it's, you know, I got my version of targeting was like a COINTELPRO targeting when they, you know, it's like Eyes Wide Shut when Tom Cruise is getting followed. And then I think the best kind of example is I ended up homeless after a couple of years. It doesn't take long. It didn't in my case anyway. I lost all my friends, family, everything. No one believes you, and you can't really talk about what's going on because it sounds insane. So I went to a movie theater in Marina del Rey, and there was a movie playing called, what was it called, Kim? The Will Smith movie, a spy game movie.
Enemy of the State.
Enemy of the State,
Yes.
sorry. So I sat in the movie theater, and in Marina del Rey, it was great because there was quite a large black population that would go to the movies there, and they yell at the screen and stuff. It's like an interactive experience almost when you go to a movie there, you know what I mean? So I'm sitting there alone watching this movie, and I start crying. You know, and these soul sisters are looking around at me and stuff going, like, who goes to Enemy of the State and cries? Well, I cried because that was, I think, about 1999, and I'd been in the game now for 3 or 4 years. And that basically, it was the best example, or it really exemplified what I had gone through. You know, as far as being tracked, followed, how are they following me? Dr. John will elaborate on satellite technology, but for me, seeing that film, I'm like, oh, maybe someone will start believing me because now it's in this movie. Well, that didn't work because that's just called revelation of the method. And then people say, oh, well, you just saw that stupid movie. That's why you think this. But that basically explains my version of targeting. I don't talk too much about directed energy weapons, although I've had a little bit of experience with it and I've been hit. But it's not something I really elaborate on. However, I do have friends that have gone through it, and I can promise you, I absolutely trust and believe my friends, and I know all of this to be true, including voice to skull. And it's really not that fantastical when you start looking at not just the patents, but you know, the evidence basically, and the fact that, you know, they've even announced. Back in 2001, I think, this jerk, what was his name? Let me find it. This guy, I don't know if you've heard of him. Wow, what a creepazoid. Dennis Bushnell announced it in 2001. Anyway,
Okay, yeah.
He's worth looking into. These people, their one downfall is their incredible arrogance. But when you guys said, let's do another show and let's talk about targeting, I'm thinking, well, I can talk about my version, you know, of like spookiness and being, and even, you know, a black whisper helicopter trying, you know, hovering above my car. But it doesn't necessarily prove anything with regards to directed energy weapons. And Dr. John Hall's written 2 books. Dr. John Hall is like a lot of us. You don't choose to get involved in this. Some of us that are involved, well, we choose because and I quote Dr. John Hall on this because I thought it was beautiful, actually. You said, when you know you're on the right side of God, you have the grace of God. You actually said that, John, in an interview, I think, with Alex Jones. And it's so true because, once you're thrown into this mess, I guess you got a couple of choices, but certainly one of them is, I'm going to speak out. Now, I may get accused of being mentally ill. I may lose my job. Happened to me. I may be completely blacklisted, but you know what? I'm compelled to tell the truth about this. And I'm not doing it, and John's, I'm sure, not doing. We're not doing it. There's no personal gain involved. If anything, you basically risk all your comfort, and your position, whatever that may be. But I wanted Dr. John Hall to come on because we're friends. I think he's just the greatest. I wish I was in Texas hanging out. He's got horses. I think John Hall and you guys have a lot in common because you guys have full-time jobs and then you come back and do all this work, right?
Right.
And obviously, John's got a full-time job and yet he's still committed to speaking out and writing books. And he really, I don't know about like the complete authority, but certainly Dr. John, after his ex-girlfriend, I think, was targeted, you gave her the benefit of the doubt, which is something that most people haven't given us. And that was actually extraordinary, even though it's just something you do for someone you care about, you would think, right? So what Dr. John Hall did is he started looking into his ex-girlfriend, and they had her being watched, and they found out, yes, in fact, this was going on. And then it just kind of, I don't know, went from there. But thanks so much for coming on. And now I can turn the table. I can turn it over to you and say, all right, so tell us all about directed energies and how messed up they are and how they're, it's a war against our mind.
Hey, we're so happy to be on the Stephen Shellen show today.
I know. I'm an egomaniac. I hate myself for that.
I love you, brother. I love you. All right,
The first thing I want to know is how you guys know each other.
Just from this community of TIs. And I generally do my art shows, my films, my short films. My stuff all addresses either child abuse, because my children were involved in all this. My ex-wife, who's more than likely any number of things, including an assassin, absolutely a call girl, probably part of brownstone operation, stuff like that. So I make my artwork about this stuff, but I do it basically kind of solitary. It's not that I don't like people in the TI community. I do have friends in it, but from my experience, it's a relatively new term. It only came into existence around 2005, 2006, I think. And through navigating my way through this, I have a tendency just to say, "Oh, screw it, I'll just go and do my own thing." But with John and I, we've met through this community, and we like each other, and there's a matter of factness to both of us where we're not talking about aliens beaming us up to their spaceships and experimenting on us. In other words, we try to stay as grounded as we can be inside of this insanity.
And that is the interesting thing with this community is, especially when Steve was in Hollywood and in his heyday and doing a lot of the great movies that he did, our paths would have never crossed. I was stuck in, doing medicine and in my rut, he was in his rut. Two vastly different worlds that, unless he had an injury and was in Texas, probably we'd have never crossed paths and never met. So that is probably one of the only blessing of being in a community like this is finding other like-minded people. And he's right, Hollywood and California in general is one of the most targeted states. There are a lot of victims, more so in California than anywhere else because a lot of the technology resides there. Hollywood uses it as a control issue for a lot of the talent that are there. And there are a lot of successful actors that are going through exactly what Stephen went through. Not many of them have stepped forward to actually, take the reign as far as activism. He's one of the few. If more of them would come out, that would be great, because as far as getting this in the public eye and with some credibility, those are the guys that are used to being in front of the camera, and are, used to talking to people, and they're outgoing, and people watch them, that's why when I first, got in contact with Steve, I said, you are the person that's perfect for doing this. I'm a doctor in Texas, I'm, I guess, successful in my own small little pond down here. But, I've got no following, and people don't know who I am. And, they're not going to look on IMDb and see much, even though I do some acting. That's why I've got the beard right now. We're shooting a Western down in Texas. Ordinarily, I'm not, this bushy looking, but we're doing a TV series called Death and Compromise, which is about Texas in the 1850s.
Wow.
I would love to have Steven in this, too, if he could ever get his butt down here. But that's why when we hooked up, he's like, I don't know. I mean, it's, who's going to listen to me? And I'm like, everybody's going to listen to you.
Yeah.
I mean, people do know you and don't really know anything about your targeting. You've got Quaid. Quaid has been subjected to this. He also fled to Canada. And there's some other actors and actresses that have been targeted too. But, and we really need those people to kind of join into the activism, because most of those people do have a following.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Dr. John, can you give us your definition of what targeting is? I mean, and why do people get targeted?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing I can really give you, and this is a hard one to get people to understand, is targeting essentially is a continuation of MK Ultra, MK Search, and all of the other programs that were geared at controlling the individual. They spent billions of dollars of MK Ultra. It was 189 sub-projects, most of which worked, and they exhausted nothing. They left no stone unturned in MK Ultra. Those 189 sub-projects were various drugs to manipulate the mind, electrical energy, RF to manipulate the mind. They studied childhood play. They studied adult behavior. They studied everything that makes the human mind work. And it worked. Now, they did have the Rockefeller Commission. We found the financial documents. We were able to trace back, some of the universities where this was done and some of the front companies it was done under. But when you have something that works that successfully and you can see the history of where they were headed, when it works, you don't just stop. It just improves as the technology improves, which is what we've got to the point now. And even Delgado, who was one of MK Ultra's most notorious researchers, he's the one who did all the brain implants. He was down at Oxnard in New Orleans. He's the guy you see that they implanted a bull, and he could clip a button and hit a button and make the bull stop or from a radio.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
He also experimented on homosexual men to make them straight and make them attracted to women by brain chipping. Even before he died, he said that all of his chipping experimentation was passé, that everything that he had done with chipping could now be done with what he called transmission, or RF-based waves, where
Radio
you don't have to
frequency.
chip anybody.
Yeah.
So essentially, they've taken the experimentees out of the lab, and they're now experimenting on society. And as Stephen alluded to in some of our conversations prior, the ultimate goal is to be able to control everyone. We're kind of the subset, or the targeted individuals are kind of the subset, or the experimentees laying that groundwork. And honestly, I mean, from what we can see, it's pretty successful. And most of these targeted individuals who have been speaking out for 20 years or so, they were called the tinfoil hat people, and they think their microwave is trying to attack them, and they think all their phone calls and their emails are being read. Well, then we had Snowden. And the stuff that Snowden released, they went, oh, the conspiracy theorists were right. It's conspiracy fact, not theory, that, they can get your emails. Well, now we've had another trove, and we're going to keep having troves of stuff coming out of WikiLeaks about the CIA. Well,
Yeah, Vault 7's been huge, actually, for us.
Yeah, everything
And then the other
said
thing,
all along is true.
That's right. Then the other thing to add to the mix is, even with Snowden and Vault 7, I was going through stuff in '95. So it and obviously there's been a lot of other people that had COINTELPRO in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So it's nothing new. And Delgado was doing this stuff back, in the 50s, 60s. You've got Michael Aquino. I mean, that guy's a monster. How that guy's still walking around, I have no idea.
Michael Aquino was in the military, right? And he's a
An OTO.
and he's a Satanist. That's correct.
Right. And so they use Satanism in their programming. So there's a lot of overlapping things with targeted individuals. It overlaps. And I don't know about you, John, but I sometimes wonder if a lot of people that have been targeted were actually part of like in Canada, a lot of the military bases were taking kids at 2 and 3 years old. Trauma-based torture included, invaded their anal cavity, and they torture 2 and 3, 4-year-old children. And then you create altars, and it's all that stuff that you hear about. Well, it's not BS. I mean, it happened. I have friends that it happened to. But
no,
sometimes
it actually happened there in Fort Worth. Actually, during MK Ultra, Texas Christian University was one of the universities that actually had a program there, and their program was studying twins. And they would actually come to people who were behind on their rent, that had kids, specifically had twins, and would say, well, we'll pay off your house or we'll pay your rent for you if you let us experiment on these twins. As a matter of fact, Colin Ross, who actually runs the Institute for Psychiatric Trauma in Dallas and California, had worked with some of these MK Ultra victims out of I forget the researcher's name who was working at TCU, but had worked with some of these people who, at least the ones who hadn't committed suicide by adulthood, to get them reprogrammed. MK Ultra, actually, there were a lot of universities and the Human Ecology Fund and several other front companies were doing a lot of that research. And there's been some really good factual books written on that based on the findings from the Freedom of Information Act on exactly where those research experiments were done. But yeah, they were done all over, and a lot of it was ritual abuse or trauma abuse, mind control, until they kind of started getting things perfected as far as the brain's susceptibility to extremely low frequency waves. And Michael Persinger, it was one of the main researchers for the Navy who discovered that the brain is very sensitive to ELF. And actually, if you go before him, Puthoff and Targ, who did all the remote...
ELF.
Extremely low frequency.
It's really simple. That's it. That's all that means, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Extremely
it's very low frequency. So obviously it flies under the radar as far as, like it's a low frequency.
So
nothing can block it. Nothing. It's anywhere from 0 to 9 or 10 hertz. Nothing can block it. It actually goes through the earth. You naturally, we get extremely low frequency waves after seismic activity. And for a long time, the Russians claimed that remote viewing and remote sensing, which we did a lot of studies on through the military, these are the people who are able to, you give them coordinates and they can sit and they can bond with that coordinate and tell you what is there. It was assumed to be a psychic ability. Right. It turns out that it's actually a function of ELF. But they had said that for a long time, and Puthoff and Targ, during their remote sensing and remote viewing experimentations, basically tried to say, no, we tested it, and it's no way inclusive of ELF wave technology. But more and more you look back on it and where their funding came from, I think the people they were working with that could successfully do that probably weren't psychically gifted. They were probably electronically augmented.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. So
well, it is. See, that's the thing. If you can try to get into the simplicity of it, and I know that seems weird, but just imagine extremely low frequencies. There's a book written called The Mind Has No Firewall. Okay, so in other words, these low frequencies they've perfected it. And what I was going to say is a lot of people that were MK Ultra as kids and they have dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. Well, if they somehow went outside of the flock, let's say they drifted off, let's say they whatever, I do think some of the targeted individuals are people that are MK Ultra and have no idea. I mean, there were so many experiments going on these military bases in the U.S., Canada, all over, really. Like they've had a field day with this stuff. And imagine Vietnam, heroin in body bags, all the trillions they made on illicit drug activity. And now we know about child trafficking. But anything that's an illicit activity where it's hidden money, that it's not accountable, you're basically funding your black ops. You're basically funding these science projects. And the number one science project, which Dr. John pointed out, is how to, I mean, you don't need weapons when you can figure out how to control how people think.
Right.
I think even Putin said at one point, whoever controls the best directed energy weapon will control the world.
That's right, yeah.
You know, and then Rothschild was famous for saying that thing about banking, which was, I care not who rules a nation, but who controls the money. You know, like it's one of these things. Like if I'm Dr. Evil and I can control how the masses think. I mean, really, Hollywood was that and still is to a certain degree, right? This mass programming tool.
Yeah.
And it's like, my gosh, can you imagine? I control how the masses think, and I'm this little Dr. Evil behind my curtain pulling levers. I mean.
Well, and Michael Persinger did most of the ELF-wave technology research for the Navy. He did it at Laurentian University. And even he said in the late 80s, after inventing what he called his God helmet, and this was basically a helmet, he could put it on you, put you in an isolated room, stimulate the brain, the right parts of the brain with the right frequency of ELF, and these people would either think they were abducted by aliens or think they were personally in the presence of God. That's why they called it the God helmet. But either way, they thought they were not alone in the room, that there was a presence with them. So he titled it the God helmet. He continued experimenting with ELF waves on the brain. And then even he said in the late 80s that he could probably control every mind on the planet using ELF. That's how sensitive the brain is to it. That's why whenever there's an earthquake, you would tend to see a bunch of UFO sightings. And it's not because probably they were really UFOs, but it was the Earth generating ELF waves from the seismic activity that was influencing the people's minds that were in the area where there was a spike in ELF waves. Well, and then there's no, that's why you saw the invention of HAARP, the High Altitude Auroral Project in Canada. It's an ionospheric heater. Its one function in life is to bombard the ionosphere with radio waves. The ionosphere heats up, forms a buckle, and slams down ELF at the Earth, which can be directed. So they said it was a tool for over-the-horizon radar. It's actually a tool to generate ELF waves because they have figured out that ELF waves, for one, can't be blocked. There's no way to block them. They go right through the Earth, and that they interact with the human mind. So once they figured that out, then they figured out ways to direct those beams, modulate those beams, and then get the human brain to entrain whatever patterns they need it to entrain to display whatever symptoms. And the way I basically interview and tell people about it is imagine having a catalog of EEG waveforms, brainwave waveforms that you have. One of them is for, let's say, sadness. One of them's for grief. One of them's for anxiety. One of them's for madness or anger. Well, if I take your EEG and heterodyne it to match one of these, display one of these symptoms, and beam it back at you, your brain will entrain that ELF wave signal, and then slowly your EEG will become that waveform, and then you'll display those symptoms. That's not the same as voice to skull. That's how you control someone, mentally. And have you ever, and one of the other ways I'll put it is, have you ever had one of those days where you're kind of feeling in a blah mood, you're not depressed, you're not down, the sun's out, it's not a sad day, but you're just, you just don't feel like working, you don't feel like doing much of anything? Well, if you talk to everybody around you, have you ever noticed everybody feels that way that day? Yeah. There's probably a reason for that.
Wow.
Wow, this is pretty fascinating stuff.
It is fascinating. Does CERN play into this?
Not so sure on that just yet. Yeah. I haven't read
I think CERN, for me anyway, is when I start looking into underground projects, the trillions of dollars, DARPA, all the experimentation. And I mean, they're having a field day, right? They're going nuts. These are some evil people. I'm not saying all this, everything's compartmentalized. So you've got good scientists, you've got good people inside, but they don't know what the big picture is. And then you get into something like CERN, which is, I mean, it's overtly, evil. And CERN ties in with it only because it's an extension of all this, pulling the veil, getting into any kind of power, anything to control people. And in the case of CERN, perhaps even, trying to break down the veil of other dimensions and
Right.
things like that.
Yeah, and
That's
I'm
right.
not even sure the scientists know what's going to happen with CERN.
Well, yeah, it's a
That's
loose
scary.
cannon.
Isn't that
It's like unlocking it's like unlocking the greatest, biggest, hugest nuclear weapon and not really knowing what you're going to do to cap it.
Right.
I mean, yeah, there's no, but transhumanism, I did a video game, John. Do you remember? Did you see any of that stuff? And they just tore me apart. And I wouldn't do another one because I found out about 2 or 3 months into it. I came home and I said, Kim, you're not going to believe this. I play a guy that owns this transhumanist, major corporation. I augment people. And, the transhumanists will always argue that we're doing this for the betterment of mankind.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they always pull that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not for the betterment of mankind. Transhumanism is just flat out dangerous, and it's basically aligning humans and AI. And so anyway, I've been outspoken about the transhumanist thing, but it does tie in because if I'm already working on, let's say in my DARPA lab, I'm already working on experimenting with innocent housewives, on how to make them bark like a dog, how to make them hear voices, how to make them, because you honestly can control someone's moods, and the person owns that mood. Because, if we're regular, relatively normal people, and you wake up and you feel really anxious and depressed, your natural inclination is to go, I own that. I woke up feeling like that.
Yeah.
I really have no self-esteem. I feel really bad about myself. You're not going to sit there and go, oh, this is probably being done to me.
I have so many questions. So if it's a low frequency, you can also listen to like a 528 hertz or something like that. Would that combat it at all?
Yeah, you're right. I think there are frequencies, right, John, that do help. I know my friend Livingston would listen to certain frequencies. Yeah.
One of the things that we've been fighting this with is actually manipulating the EEG to reprogram it back down to 7.8 to 8 hertz, which is typically kind of where your mind likes to rest. It's called a Schumann resonance.
Yeah, that's it.
And one of the things that we have been working successfully with some targets with is basically putting them on a binaural beat program that they use at night through earphones and kind of reprogramming. Is the way heterodyning the EEG works is there's a particular waveform in the brain waves that has to be there for them to target. At least it was in the past. Now this is evolving technology, and the minute you find something that works to combat it, they'll find something to get past your defense.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are working on shielding. Even well-made research anechoic chambers or Faraday cages don't block everything. And certainly shielding, I know a lot of victims are really concentrating on shielding. But if you're walking around in your suit that blocks out all the radio waves, that's going to land you in front of a psychiatrist. just the same as talking about being stalked or.
How well does that work out for people, John? Tell these guys how well it works out if, let's say 5 years ago, someone goes to the psychiatrist and says, this is what I'm experiencing.
Yeah, typically you'll either get a schizophrenic diagnosis or you'll get a delusional disorder, more than likely diagnosis. And just so you know, from a psychiatrist's point of view, the way you diagnose delusional disorder, basically you tell the psychiatrist a story. If it seems plausible, you're okay. If it seems implausible, then you're delusional. And I even had a psychiatrist friend of mine explain it to me. He goes, well, if we had a CIA agent come in saying, I think people are following me, well, then he's probably, they're not going to call him delusional. He's in an occupation that it stands to reason that would happen. Now, if Kim came in there and said, oh, I think I'm being followed and people are trying to get at me and blah, 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 you're going to get well, why you? And that's what all targeted individuals, why would people be spending this kind of money on following you and doing this to you? Well, it's the same thing they asked the victims of the radiation experiments in New Mexico and Arizona during the 50s and 40s, 50s and 60s. That's the same thing they asked the victims of clouds of radiation and bacteria that were floated over major cities to see how many people would get thyroid cancer and how many people would get influenza. That's the same thing that they asked the parents of the children at Willowbrook School when they were injecting them with hepatitis virus to try to create a hepatitis vaccine. Bottom line is there are no laws in the United States that prevent the government from experimenting on the public. None.
Is that unreal?
whatsoever.
Is that unreal? Be right back.
There are no laws, but most people don't realize that we are being experimented on. If we bring this to light, what are the chances there may become a law?
Well, John Glenn, when he was a senator, he did try to pass legislation making informed consent a necessity for any experimentation funded by the government. Congress shot it down. I don't know if you remember, Obama held the bioethics commission hearings. There were
I mentioned
six
that
of
to
them,
Annie, yeah.
and there were, and that was after the press, the media exposed another Tuskegee experiment type of situation where we were experimenting on prisoners and people in Nicaragua with weaponized syphilis and gonorrhea. Well, when that got exposure and Hillary Clinton had to give them a big public apology, he called for the bioethics commissions. I spoke at one of those commission hearings, and they sat a bunch of government apologists, who were ethics people from Rice, from Harvard, and from Yale, and Amy Gutman was the doctor, the PhD that was in charge of it. And I will tell you this, every one of those 6 meetings, they had a public forum. Every one of those public forums had over 1,000 people in the public forum waiting to get their half minute to speak. And every single person at every meeting that got up and spoke voiced directed energy weapons attack, surveillance technology exposure, and being stalked with this type of technology. There were no other complaints. I mean, over 1,000 at each one. And at the end of the day, when her letter came out and they compiled all the data, which their sole goal was to determine if any ongoing experimentation was going on here or abroad using government money that was non-consensual. And at the end of the day, they said, no, we have no convincing evidence that there's any non-consensual experimentation ongoing. That's after 1,000 people at each one of those meetings voiced those complaints.
Guys, what is the end game objective here? Because our air is being poisoned, our water is being poisoned, our food is being poisoned, we have directive energy that attacks. It seems like that there's a full onslaught attack on human beings.
There is.
I mean, so what is the end game objective of these nuts?
Well, it's Dr. Evil and his gang, and they were experimenting on a lot of us. A lot of us were, in fact, whistleblowers. But, just listening to Dr. John talk, and I was invited also to the bioethics committee hearing. I didn't go because, quite honestly, I'd been in it so long at that point. I'm like, you know what? Probably nothing's going to come of this, and I'm going to waste all this money going down to Washington and then later New York. And you know what? I just don't have the heart for it. I'll make some art about it instead or something. That's just my way, right? And, sure enough, nothing got done. Now, just imagine that whatever minority, whatever group you might belong, like whoever you are inside of this world and you belong and you somehow find yourself, you're Armenian or you're this or you're that. Well, imagine these people that are targeted individuals. And they've been fighting for years to convince their family and friends that something's going on. They can prove it through they've got photographs of burn marks on their bodies from being burned from electromagnetic weapons. Whatever it is, they've got a little bit of proof but they have no reason to make up a story that's going to annihilate their life. So they get together and the bioethics committee hearing thing comes up and they're like, finally, we're going to have a voice and we're going to do the right thing. We're going to make them do the right thing. So they go to these things and of course, nothing gets resolved. It doesn't even get acknowledged by this Amy Gutman or whatever her name is. So when I told these guys, John, that, because they're involved also in Pizzagate, and there was a scathing article written about Pedogate in the New York Times, Washington Post. And I'm like, well, of course there is. Because in the summer, John was doing a lot of work in different areas. And actually, the targeted individual community, thanks in large part to John, was actually getting some, and what an awful life, right? You spend your whole life trying to have a little tiny bit of believability and credibility, but you're not a liar and you're not making any of it up. and there's thousands of other people just like you. But so John was making some inroads, and we all were. It felt like it, right? It's like you can sense it. And then the New York Times does this article on targeted individual, and whether this guy's a real TI or not, I don't know. But they chose as their poster boy this poor guy that sits in his mom's basement with, tin foil on the ceiling, and seriously, this kind of hair. Oh my God, and they interviewed John, but, it was obviously just a smear job.
It was a hit job. I mean, the guy was hired to basically discredit the whole movement, and kind of basically introduced me as the Pied Piper of a bunch of crazy folks who think they're being experimented on.
And you're the good Samaritan that fell for it.
Guys, I'm completely on board with what you're saying, and I completely agree with what you're saying. So, once again, the question is, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, what is the end game here? Because we know that there's chemtrails. We know about what's in the vaccinations. We know that they have fluoride in the water. All right. We know about the Monsanto. And so, really, I mean, what do you think is going on here?
I think the end game is to control a global population. And as conspiratorial as it sounds, we're going to need people always need a boogeyman to be controlled. And basically, they're going to figure out whatever boogeyman that we need as a human race to basically have a one world government that control the way the population thinks and votes, so they're never out of power again. And you can see that now with what we've got in our political system in the United States. We had 8 years of failed progressive liberal policies, and they thought that was going to continue on forever, that they would never lose again. Well, now there's a semi-outsider who wasn't a career politician and they're just going nuts,
right.
Because they thought it was never going to end. And what I've said forever, people said, well, the Democratic Party is the party of the people. Those should be the people that we can actually, get more done with. I'll be honest. I've talked to a lot of government people, a lot of politicians. I've had better luck with Republicans and libertarians as far as getting them to understand this, the ethics behind it, the believability of it. Feinstein, Pelosi, all of these California senators, victims have sent them letter after letter after letter, and what they get back is a letter recommending they see a psychiatrist. The Democratic Party is not the party of JFK anymore. No. It's an extension of the Socialist Party, and they need control measures more than anyone else to keep that going, because most of us that work for a living and pay tax don't want socialism, and certainly don't want to lose American sovereignty to a one world type of government that the UN wants.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're saying that this type of low frequency wave that can be sent out anytime, who's sending it, by the way? Who's got control of that?
Basically, it's under multiple controls. The DOD has versions of it, NSA has versions of it, CIA has versions of it. When I wrote my first book and second book, I have contacts within the CIA. All of that was verified. As a matter of fact, one of my friends in the CIA said, this is a weapon for use abroad. It's not supposed to be used in the United States. And we've had other world leaders. Noriega, when he was caught, complained of hearing voices and being attacked by directed energy. Other world leaders that found themselves on the wrong side of the stick with our government have also complained about it. It's not just your everyday folks that are complaining of it, although they make up the bulk of the experimentees because they have no way to explain it. They don't have the educational background to understand it in most cases. So they're online every day looking for every little thing they can, and a lot of it's wrong or misinformation that they're finding to try to describe it, which makes them look even crazier.
Right, because here's the thing. See, when you get hit with this stuff, or if you're targeted in any way, I call it lunging, because I think our brain wants to understand information. So what happens is, as a consequence, is you're trying to find the bad guy. And you go back and you rack your brain. I mean, I do it almost every single damn morning. I'll wake up with a new epiphany about who was behind it. It was due south. It was Robert Lantos. He stole the treatment I wrote. Like almost every single morning I'll wake, and I can't control that. Like I'm in sleep mode, right? So I'm going to wake up how I'm going to wake up, and I don't heavily medicate myself to sleep or anything like that because I refuse to go that route. But you're always trying to understand who the boogeyman is. And unfortunately, with a lot of people that get hit with this, whether it's COINTELPRO, whether it's directed energy, whatever targeting they're subjected to, you waste your life. What a waste of a life, man.
Yeah.
You waste your life trying to overanalyze what you like. I was rude to that waitress once at Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you waste your life trying to make sense of an insane, situation. And sometimes people are just randomly picked.
Yeah.
Mostly then, and that's why the title of my second book is called Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control.
Wow.
The majority of these people, and now there are the whistleblowers, and I've worked with a lot of them that have got on the wrong side of the NSA or the CIA or the National Geospatial Agency. But by and large, it's housewives, doctors, lawyers, artisans, shopkeepers. It's a sample of the general population, and there's no other reason other than the fact that they were at the wrong place at the right time and became a guinea pig of the state.
So they pick somebody and then they observe them as far as what they're doing.
Pretty much. Yeah. But long before you ever hear voices or get attacked by weaponry, they've already watched you, picked you out. They know where you work. They know who your loved ones are. They know who you're going to turn to for help. They know who to control, so they don't believe you despite the amount of evidence that you have. Ultimately, the goal is to get you in front of a psychiatrist, get you diagnosed, so you're completely discredited, and you can sit at home and be a guinea pig.
Guys, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, okay, and I started with this before, but there's so many questions popping in my head.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
The low frequency.
I know it's a tough subject, man. You guys are brave.
No,
you guys are brave to take.
It's actually not. It is a tough subject, but it's a fascinating subject, which we could probably talk about this for 2 days.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm still not understand it all.
Yeah.
Like when you say, "What's the end game?" Well, just control how we think. Well, how about they also get pleasure from torturing innocent people?
There you go.
I mean, there's women that complain that they're being sexually stimulated, and it's against their will. Well, who's going to believe that woman?
Yeah.
No one. It's this sick game that no one's going to believe you. I know personally they've loved ridiculing me, and they take me, the kind of wild guy, Hollywood actor guy, and just strip them of everything, and they enjoy it. It's like, you're not dealing with.
And as far as the sexual stimulation of women too. That's not just in the hands of the victims. If you look at the releases about what the NSA was doing, the NSA got their hands slapped for a lot of their officers were using the technology afforded them by the NSA to actually spy on their ex-wives, their girlfriends, women they would meet at the supermarket. Yeah. And it was happening so frequently that in the NSA, they call it LOVEINT, LOVEINT, love intelligence. And, and Feinstein, who sits on the Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, said, well, we're going to get to the bottom of it, and this is unacceptable. And, of course, you never heard anything about it again. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, every single Democratic congressman, Senate and House up there, voted against oversight of the NSA.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. When you give a person that much power and then expect them to do the right thing, it doesn't happen.
Okay, is every single person, there's nobody that can be immune to this or can be saved from this. Is that what I'm hearing?
No.
I don't know. Ask John. I don't know.
So you literally...
I mean, on one way or another, if you get targeted one way or another, I mean, how are you immune to someone sitting outside your house? How are you immune to lying in bed and getting zapped? I mean... Well, how are you immune? I don't know. You've got a special DNA that's got, I don't know, R chromosome something, or I don't know. How are you immune? It's like if someone completely insults you and pokes you with a stick constantly, and when you look around, you can't catch them poking you with a stick.
I think the scary part...
It's going to drive you nuts.
I think the scary part is that you guys are saying that it doesn't even have to be for a reason that you're a whistleblower. They will just pick random people and experiment on them. And
I think that's why John's spoken out, and I know it's why about 4 or 5 years ago I started doing, or 6, 7 years ago, more interviews, just because, yeah, you've got innocent people that someone's getting their yayas, they're getting off actually, doing this, experimenting on some housewife in Nebraska.
The best way to describe it is that there are groups in every major city that are typically they're functioning as private investigators, but they still hold clearances. Usually they're former FBI or former CIA or former NSA working as private investigators that are allowed access to the technology and have carte blanche reign over however they want to use it to target whoever, as long as the data gets back to the appropriate agencies. So what you see is, you'll see a PI group in Palm Springs that's targeting gay men. You'll see a group here in San Antonio, Texas, that's mostly using it for sexual assault. That's what my first book was about. The girl that I wrote about was being drugged and being basically used as a sex slave. They were drugging her with rohypnol. Men were paying money to rape her. Then you have a group in Florida that maybe is using it for corporate espionage. The group here also advertises use for corporate espionage. Well, when you take all of those groups of people from all the major cities, even though it's being done, carte blanche by the group allowed to access the technology, when you compile that population together, you have a pretty broad subset that mimics the general population, which is really what they're looking for at the top. And the reason they're doing that is, as you know about the Rockefeller Commission. They found all the financial documents. That's what actually led us to know what we do know about MK Ultra. Well, they're being sure that doesn't happen again. So instead of it being done directly by government agents that are actually under the employ of the government, other than in cases of whistleblowers where it is being done that way, the majority of it is being done by subcontractors.
Well, we're living at a time right now that the trust of the government is probably at the lowest it's ever been. You guys are coming out with this information at a very good time, because people are actually believing you and me right now as we're coming out with these stories. No longer is this conspiracy. WikiLeaks, it's true. WikiLeaks has shown that it's true. CIA is complicit in all of these things that you guys are talking about right now. So, and then when I get articulate guys like you to speak up like this, it really adds to the credibility of this story.
Yeah. Have there ever been lawsuits? Has anybody ever found out and tried to bring up a lawsuit?
Thousands.
Really?
Thousands.
Yeah.
All around the world.
Actually, some of them by former NSA agents.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, we investigated ourselves and we found ourselves not guilty.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with targeting, is people always ask me, well, there's got to be a lawyer that can help me. Well, for one, lawyers can only deal with the tangible. Mm-hmm. And even as, my case, the girl that I helped here, the SAPD people, the sex crimes unit, they had no problems believing me. I was doing their anesthesia. Matter of fact, the lieutenant in charge of their department, I had put to sleep for surgery a number of times. He had no problem believing the story. What we were left with, he said, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove in court. And there's no way to adequately measure or be able to prove that you're being hit by invisible waves.
Right.
John?
Dr. John can get into the whole clinical thing of it. You can go there, right, John?
Yeah.
It's just that I want a layperson that's never been, let's say some guy turns in to watch your show and they're just barely getting their head around 9/11 possibly being an inside job. Right. Like any of us. I don't think John, I certainly was never, I wasn't a Hollywood actor guy. I helped out homeless people. I let them sleep in my backyard if they didn't, but I wasn't like gung-ho on any kind of conspiracy. I wasn't looking for a conspiracy.
Right.
And so I imagine someone like that, and that really has never been exposed to much of anything, and they're listening to us today, and they're I'm trying to make it palatable that, like, getting targeted, it's like a lot of people go through divorces. Divorces don't last long. Marriages don't last like they used to. What is it? 50% of marriages end in divorce at least now, right?
Yeah.
And in divorce court, the wife or the husband, they make all these horrible accusations, and it's terrible, and you have lawyers and you get through it. Well, imagine you have a lifetime, 20 years of being accused by this, but all these different people, but you never get a face, you never find out what they've said, It's like you're fighting against this invisible enemy, and they're constantly calling you mentally ill and crazy.
How
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's an awful, the targeted individual thing, really, it's not really, that part of it's not really been dealt with too much. It's like, yeah, we go through this. And yes, whether it's directed energy, whether it's COINTELPRO targeting, whatever it might be, but it's a psychological breakdown of you. And you're on defensive. And you see it online when shills come in or trolls, and they say all these horrible, nasty things. And you can say it's all ad hominem arguments. They call you fat, they call you ugly, they call you stupid. Yeah. But it's got nothing to do with what the task is at hand, like what you're actually trying to address, right? But it's all these insults. Well, imagine that you're a single individual and you go through this, and your family, your friends, your career, everything's affected by it, and yet you have no defense against it. Because, like John said, how do you prove it? How do you improve this invisible stuff that's going on? How do you improve, how do you prove that, so you're all like that psychological makeup, but like that's why I use humor, because otherwise I just want to cry half the time.
Yeah.
Well,
Like it's much easier.
I'm sorry.
You can't. I got to keep. I want to keep fighting, and when I get a friend like John, who knows about the ins and outs of certainly the directed energy weapons and how all that stuff was developed, the patents were developed years ago, by the way. This is not new technology. Excuse me, like I said, imagine Tesla, and he's got a death beam in the Second World War. Yugoslavia doesn't want it, Britain doesn't want it, America doesn't want it. They just want to keep the war machine going, but they don't use Tesla's technology. And then when Tesla dies, they keep him alive as long as they can so they can siphon his information from him. Yeah, milk him for everything he's worth. And Tesla dies broke in a hotel room. But meanwhile, all this stuff that's going on, a lot of it has been an extension of what Tesla was working on 90 years ago. So if Tesla was working on this stuff all these years ago and dealing with the ionosphere and dealing with energies and what,
electromagnetic.
like if Tesla, and I think Tesla was a good guy that wanted us all to have free electricity. I mean, I think Tesla's heart was in the right place. So imagine that they find this genius, Tesla, they steal all his stuff. Do you really think, knowing what you know now, that they just take all the information and all the developments that Tesla made, and it's like, oh, well, we won't bother spending any money or time developing any of this stuff Tesla worked on? Of course.
Of course.
The Nazis, a lot of this is an extension of stuff that Tesla tapped into 90 years ago. They're not going to leave that alone.
Right. Dr. John, how did you first find out that stuff like this was going on?
I had heard a little bit about it from some of my CIA contacts and people I knew within government, so I kind of knew the technology was there. I really didn't get into the activism until I actually had an ex-fiance come to me. We had already broken up. She came to me after we had broken up and said, "You're the only person I can confide into with this. I've got people following me that I don't know everywhere, and I'm hearing voices and being attacked by something." So, I said, well, she goes, "Is that possible and me not be crazy?" And you'd be surprised how many people actually, send themselves to a psychiatrist and going, "Well, I'm hearing people talk to me and I'm feeling things happening to me, and either it's demons or angels or I'm nuts." And of course the psychiatrist goes, no, you're nuts.
Yeah.
But people with true mental illness usually don't seek help. Schizophrenics don't go out of their way to seek help.
And schizophrenics develop in the late teens, early 20s. I just want to add that. So at 38 years old, a guy like me doesn't suddenly develop schizophrenia. Right. It would be really extreme if that happened, right?
Yeah, and that's the other thing. And schizophrenia and mental illness, it improves with medication. Targeting doesn't.
Right.
And that's another big distractor. But this girl came to me and I said, you know what? Yes, there's technology that can do that. I don't know why it would be getting used on you. I was, like any other doctor that would tell a targeted individual now, I was the same way. I was like, why you? You show apartments for a living. You're not the head of a corporation. You're politically inactive. She didn't even vote. She wasn't affiliated with either side.
That was
me. But she was attractive, and that was the main thing. as it turns out. But so I said, you know what, let's give you the benefit of the doubt. Let's wire up your condo and let's see if somebody's following you. So we put voice-activated recorders in her condominium. I had other people counter-surveilling her. And indeed, she was being followed everywhere she went by a former FBI agent who works as a private investigator in San Antonio, Texas. And we wrote down all the plate numbers. All of the plate numbers following her came back to this same agency. They advertise corporate espionage. He's the go-to guy that you go to if you're going through a divorce and you want to make your wife look crazy so she can't get custody of the kids and you don't have to pay child support.
Yeah,
you
man.
hire this guy and he breaks into the house. He gets her hearing voices. He attacks her with stuff. So she's calling the police every day, claiming that she's getting attacked by the waves and that she's hearing voices and that it's all a setup and they're trying to make her look crazy. And indeed, it makes her look crazy. And she can't get custody, and the guy doesn't have to pay child support. He's been doing this in San Antonio for years. It's basically a weapon of rich folks to pay him, but he has access to that technology through his clearance. And he hired nothing but his close relatives. So it's a private investigator that is former FBI, owned by former FBI, with a son that's a lieutenant colonel in the DOD, and a bunch of other relatives that he hired. There are no non-relatives working for him. And they do the stalking. They do the satellite-based, control. And what happened with her is they were breaking into her condo, putting rohypnol in her bottled water and food stuff. And then they would basically subliminally control her to drink and eat where they put the rohypnol. They rented condos on either side of her condo and would wait until she was in a drug state and then break in and sexually assault her. And once they knew that I knew this was going on, because I knew their vehicles, they started showing up in cabs, which is, if any of you have been to San Antonio, unless you're in downtown San Antonio around the Riverwalk, you never see a cab here. We're a long, spread out.
And everyone's got a car.
Everybody's got a car here. Nobody uses cabs. Well, all of a sudden, there's 3 or 4 yellow cabs a night coming into her place. And if they saw me there, they would pull on off and leave. If they thought I was leaving, they would sit in the parking lot and wait. And that's how they were bringing these men who were basically paying money to sexually assault her once they had her drugged up. So once I saw that, when we went to the police had no problems believing us. They said, we'll investigate. Well, and they did find that she was being stalked. Now, there's nothing they could do about the way she was being controlled because there's nothing tangible to present that in court. This was in 2000. Stalking laws in Texas were pretty negligible. Well, now we do have strong stalking laws that do cover that. If you're followed by the same person twice, you can get a restraining order. You no longer have to wait until you've been injured. Well, the reason those laws change is because of 2 cases, ours and another one that I worked with where there was a girl who actually complained about stalking and actually had her stalkers came to her house, held her at gunpoint, made her slit her wrist, and leave a suicide note. Well, when she told the doctors and the police this, they said, well, you were just severely depressed, you're looking for an excuse for you trying to kill yourself, and you need mental help. Well, 2 months later, her stalker shot her in the neck in the parking lot of her work and killed her. So then that all came, finally, her name was Christy Appleby, if you want to look that up in Texas news. Well, those 2 cases got the stalking laws changed in Texas in about 2014, which was a little late to help with the girl that I had to help with. But yeah, there was no question who was doing her stalking. There was no question that the directed energy weapons and the remote technology they were using on her, absolutely no question. But in the end of the day, what the police said is the only thing we can come after him for is stalking. We have essentially no stalking laws. She was drugged with rohypnol, doesn't remember the sexual assault. She thought they were nightmares. So basically, we're going to have to go after him for stalking you, meaning me, because by that time they were following me back and forth from her place to my place and destroying my vehicles. And actually,
they shot up your car, didn't they?
Shot up my car, took the bolts out of the hood latch to my truck. The hood flew up on me going down the highway and shot up my bedroom with me in it. So, and they still basically, the feeling that I got from the police was this guy's former FBI. He stalks people for a living. That's what he does. We don't have stalking laws to really go after him and to do any good. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So at that point, that's when I decided to change the names, write this whole story in a book to get basically public exposure of a problem, not knowing that the first radio show I did for this book literally filled up my email memory on my server. I had 6,000 emails in one night after doing George Norrie's Coast to Coast with people saying, this is happening to me in Maine. This is happening to me in Toronto. This is happening to me in Japan. This is happening to me in California. And it turned out to be a global thing. So like Stephen says, you don't choose to be in this fight. The fight chooses you.
Right.
Yeah, I never set out to spearhead the motion, or the movement for targeted individuals. I wrote a book to try to expose a local problem, and it turns out to be a global one.
Wow.
It sounds like we're living in North Korea on steroids right now, to be honest with you. I mean, this is, America is supposed to be the land of freedom, and this isn't supposed to happen here, but it is happening here. And I know a lot of people are discouraged because they know what's going on, and they want Trump to do something about it. But I tried telling people that this has been going on for so long. This is so deep. It's so corrupt. It's so expansive in the government right now that if Trump is for real, he has to tread lightly with all of this. He's got to do it strategically. Because
I don't know what his plan is. I mean, I worry about him in Trump Tower. I'm sure he's been informed that this technology is in existence. Wouldn't you think, Dr. John? Like, the guy has to know, but how's he going to firewall himself? Like, how's he going to protect him? I don't know, He's got experts, obviously, around him that know that this exists. But, yeah, it's a very nefarious, sneaky. I mean, they've all been working on it. I like Putin. That's just me. But maybe Putin's also, he knows about this stuff. That's that quote, whoever controls the best directed energy weapons will control the world. That apparently came from Putin. Now, you can cross-reference and see if that's, in fact, coming from him. But still, it's like, my gosh, like this directed energy weapon, like, you're controlling how people think. They do it with Hollywood. They do it with the movies. They do it with the video games. But when you focus in on one person, you can actually make me wake up every morning feeling anxious and depressed and suicidal. I'm not saying that's the case with me. I'd certainly never admit to suicide.
No.
Because that's a boo-boo, right?
Yeah, don't
but if someone can affect my moods, and John, I don't know if you know this, but I really make a conscious effort not to concentrate or buy into directed energy weapons being used against me. Kim and I both know I've gone through it. I mean, it's evident. But I just try to make a conscious effort not to try to give that. Like, I believe in God. I'm a Christian. And I do ultimately, if you say, what's the end goal? Yeah. Man, the end goal's this. Like, we're in a spiritual battlefield. That's really it. That's essentially it. Like, and so I personally make a choice of trying to prey on this stuff and not give it too much energy.
Yeah.
Because I see people around me that really get caught up, and it's not their fault, but paranoia is kind of a natural reaction to going through any of this stuff. Not only that, but anger, suppressed depression, or suppressed anger, which turns into depression, because you're constantly fighting this uphill battle of trying to be believed, Yeah. I mean, that's never really been looked at, I don't know of, inside the TI community. It's like, what a crappy place to be in. Like, you know how hard I have to fight and try to have an art show or get a film out or do anything. It's like, I've got this invisible thing shutting down everything I try. If I do get any attention, I'm immediately attacked. It's almost always ad hominem stuff. I'm insane. I'm crazy. And it's like, you'd think, well, yeah, okay, listen, how's this? I'm crazy, but I'm creative. Is that okay? Is that palatable for you? No, you're insane. Well, you know what I mean? So you're always at these people. I'm stronger than a lot of people, but you're always at war with, like, this invisible, entity that's trying to, like, tear you to pieces. And that you know, I don't care how strong you are, it really wears on you. How well did your ex-girlfriend fare, John?
Well, I mean, we actually had to change her name and move her. I don't even know where she is now. I mean, the honest truth is, luckily, I eventually got her parents to believe her, which they didn't believe her until they saw that the condo was being repainted overnight and stuff was being reconstructed in her condo, because they had low-tech technology buried in her condo as well. I mean, when you're doing stuff to get actually, you know, video footage of rape, you know, you can't get that using thermal imaging. You need low-tech cameras buried in the walls and things. And when they finally discovered that what she was saying was true, luckily she had a father that had military connections, was a former colonel in the military, and they actually got her name changed and got her moved out of San Antonio.
And my point is this: she didn't do anything to deserve this.
Right.
No, she showed apartments for a living.
No,
Exactly.
You know, I got to commend both of you, because you're doing a tremendous service to a lot of people that thought that they were crazy for a very long time. And for you guys to come out and tell your stories like this is going to help many, many people. This has happened with CPS cases and child molestation cases, and now targeting cases. Okay, because there's a lot of targeting that people that have been targeted that didn't want to tell their story previously because they didn't want people to think that they were nuts. So, you know, you guys are doing a great service right now, and I applaud both of you.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you think that politicians are being manipulated with any of this kind of stuff, or do you think that they are excluded? They're too inside the circle and know what's going on?
They
I
absolutely
think
would be
politicians are
exposed
being
to it.
victimized.
If you're a good politician, if you're actually one of the good guys, it's this invisible weapon. You don't think they're going to use it against some politician that actually has like backbone and is telling the truth and believes in like helping his constituents and doing the right thing? I mean, that guy's the enemy, right? So they're going to go after that guy, and that's, you know, we don't even know what any of those stats are.
Right.
And when
they do know it exists, because Dennis Kucinich actually wrote a bill called the Space Preservation Bill.
Oh yeah, right.
And the initial wording in that bill specifically addressed psychotronic weaponry, then weaponry with the ability to control people's minds or control people's moods or alter their mood states. And all of that writing was taken out of the bill before it was subjected to Congress, which it got shot down anyway, because I don't know, most people don't realize it. There was a global space initiative for non-weaponization of space, and the U.S. was the only major country with a space program that wouldn't sign it. So the Russians signed it, the Chinese signed it, the Israelis signed it, but the U.S. wouldn't sign basically a treaty agreeing for the non-weaponization of space. And if anybody gets a copy of that original space preservation bill that Kucinich wrote, it is in black and white that he knew exactly what weapons are on the space-based, satellite-based platform. They were all in there initially.
Was that during the Obama administration that they?
No, that was prior to the Obama administration.
I can think of very few more nefarious things that a government can do than to mess with somebody's mind. Seriously.
And they've been doing it for a long time.
And they've been doing it for a very long time.
I'm actually amazed that we're as healthy as we are, and I don't just mean TIs. I mean, I mean like, you know, America, Canada, like the general public. We've actually held together pretty well, considering they've employed almost everything to control us and mess us up, and yet still there's people with backbone. There's people with a sense of right and wrong. There's people with a sense of morality without it being, you know, a corny morality. Like, you know, there are a lot of decent people, and there's a lot of people that, like, look at me, look at Dr. John, like, we're still here, right? You know what I mean? Like, I still have a sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
That hasn't, they've tried everything, but that hasn't been, you know, put into question. I still have a sense of right and wrong. It's almost like they can't take that away, and it's the only criticism. There's a guy called Dr. Robert Duncan that's done extensive work on all this stuff. But sometimes Dr. Duncan or Robert Duncan can get a little bit like, oh, there's no hope. They control everything. There's nothing we can do. Well, I say no. There is something we can do. We can all, we can all be in our own little, put on our own little, I don't know, spiritual warfare outfit. And we're responsible for ourselves, and we can't engage in this spiritual warfare. The end game, I guess, it has to be the spiritual warfare. I don't know,
Well, and
know.
if you look at the way most of these other experimentation protocols ended, it'll be 40 years after we started voicing complaints about this. There'll be somebody with big enough media exposure that will expose, oh my God, they really were experimenting on people's minds. There'll be a congressional hearing. They'll blame it on national security, and then we'll get whichever version of Hillary Clinton, whoever was the State Department at that time, will come out and give everybody a big apology. They did it with Tuskegee. They did it at the Acre hearings for the people that were experimented on with radiation, and it'll be that way with us too. It'll be.
And they did it with
30 years.
residential schooling in Canada, where they killed 50% of the native kids that were taken from their communities and put in residential schools, and were tortured, sexually abused, murdered. 50% never came home. Then they finally offer an apology. How do you offer an apology if you killed off 50% of the Aboriginal people in Canada?
Yeah.
What, the apology's good enough?
No.
No, it's not, obviously, right? And what about with the suffering? And then you create generational abuse because you've done that to one child, and then that child gets out of residential school if they live that long, and then they're going to, be abusive to their children based on what they've been, do you know what I mean? It just doesn't end. But I do believe that the controllers or the people behind a lot of this stuff, they're very sick, people that have already been exposed to extreme abuse themselves. And so this is nothing for them. This is just an extension. We're just like the worthless eaters that have to be their guinea pigs. But I'm not ever going to accept it. Never.
You guys made a good point though about the millennials and I call them snowflakes, and we don't have a lot of empathy or sympathy for them. But maybe I have to rethink that right now, because there's an onslaught, there's an attack on their minds right now, and it's not their fault. So they don't know. They're just going to college, and they're just being infiltrated right now by a bunch of maniacal Luciferian nutbags that want to control their minds. And so,
Daryl, that guy, for anyone listening, Daryl Hamamoto. Wow, this guy's amazing because he really nails, just basically that whole intelligentsia community, how they've infiltrated universities. I mean, I'm old enough, and I'm sure you guys, John is too, and I remember when you'd hear about in the 60s, let's say, and you'd go to university and you debate your professor, and I'm thinking, oh, that's cool. Like some older kid in the neighborhood's telling me about his brother, and they're arguing in university with their professor, and there was this, I wouldn't say but in a discourse, there was a chance to debate, to engage, to talk, to argue. All those things I think are healthy. And now the education system has really just been memorize this and we'll pass.
Feed it back.
Yes.
Yeah. And you don't have any critical thinking skills that are encouraged. You're really just AI is what you are. I'm going to memorize all this stuff on my cell phone and take my test. Okay, let's go.
Well,
How is that anything?
Sorry. Yeah.
No. It's not, you've heard about people that graduate and have great, educations, but they have absolutely no street smarts, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, this is kind of like the extension of that, but on steroids, where these poor kids, there's no chance to think for themselves anymore. The education system has been completely messed with, and that's all been intentional.
Well, my favorite story is I had one of my friend's kids come up to me. She was 10 or 11 at the time, and I'd given her a handwritten note, and she looked at it and she goes, "Is this hieroglyphics?" And I said, "Man, my handwriting's bad, but it's not that bad." You know, I mean, you should be able to. She goes, I can't read this. Can you print it? And I said, you can't read hand. She goes, they don't teach us cursive writing anymore. They teach us keyboarding and they teach us printing. And I said, what do you do if you have to sign a check? And she goes, well, we just print our name, I guess, on it. They absolutely don't teach handwriting anymore in schools.
No,
I heard that handwriting, like if you're going through psychotherapy or whatever, I've heard that handwriting, not this stuff, but actually writing by hand is like incredibly therapeutic. And it's another one of these, it's going to become a lost art, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, for sure. We're being dumbed down as a society, by the way. Also, with all the AI, the smartphones, like we used to be able to memorize dozens, 20, 50 phone numbers. Now I can't remember my wife's telephone number. I just see Angie. That's all I need to know is Angie. But that doesn't work all the time, right? You know, sometimes you need to know the telephone number. You know?
Well, that's why try going to a McDonald's and ordering a Big Mac without the special sauce. There's no picture for that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's so true.
So is there any way that anybody can protect themselves from the directed energy? Is there no way?
There's some things that can lessen it, especially if it's microwave-based weapons. Salt water tends to refract it a little bit. I mean, some people, if usually they pick a spot to attack on you, and if you know they're going to hit the same spot over and over, you can use bags of saline over it, things like that. But as far as, building any type of shielding or anything, that's real limited. The easier way to defend from it is first they have to find you spatially in order to, unleash directed weapons on you. And the way to actually block that is by actually blocking your EEG or altering your EEG where the tracking is not so successful. And that's where we use binaural beat programs and what we call resynchronization of the EEG or the brain waves. Because if you can stop the tracking, then the directed energy attacks will kind of fade off because they anatomically can't find you on the map to do it. But as far as actually shielding materials, the government can't even shield themselves. As a matter of fact, most of this technology was invented, without any defense to it. And for the last several years, the Air Force and the Navy have both had a call for white papers out. That's, in government agencies, they'll put out a call for papers to the private sector to see who's working on stuff like this. And there's been calls for papers out to defend against RF-based weapons for, 5 or 10 years now. And that's why when you see these guys that control the drones, the drones being flown in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq, a lot of them are controlled here. Right. And they'll actually put these guys with these RF-based controls in giant, thick steel cargo trailers. Kind of imagine like the big giant steel dumpsters that pick up construction materials, but with a steel top on them. Because that's even the best they can do, and it's still not impervious as well.
Wow.
Huh.
Hey, so I guess we'll start closing up. So, Dr. John, if anybody has any questions, you have a website that they can go to?
Actually, the best way to get a hold of me is on Facebook, and I will tell your listeners, for anybody that doesn't believe that the government will experiment on the public, without remorse, read Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control, because I go through the first several chapters are based on known experimentation that the government's perpetrated on the public. If you don't believe what I'm writing, well, look at the references. They're all there. So that would be just go to Facebook, look up Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control. You can find me there.
Hey, and Stephen, I got yelled at for not asking the same question to you last time. How can people get a hold of you?
It's www.stephenschellenberger.com. That's not my real name, by the way. I had to, Stephen Shellen was finished, so I used my dad's last name and added ER on the end. My dad was German, and he was in the Canadian Navy in the Second World War. So he changed his name from Schellenberg to Shellen. And I thought, well, now that I'm getting beat up and hated and despised and ridiculed, I might as well be German again,
And I would like to say I'm trying to get Stephen to come down to Texas because I think Stephen would be an excellent counselor in our new TV series. Yeah. Have you ever played a cowboy? Well, you played like an 1800s pioneer guy.
I played a lot of rednecks,
That'll
mostly
work.
rednecks that kill people and stuff. But anyway, this has
guys.
been a loopy doopy crazy interview.
Yeah.
I suggest that anyone watching this check out Dr. John All's info, go to the websites, look at the information, read the books, or skim through them, whatever you have to do. We haven't like nailed anybody with all kinds of crazy technology today, right? We're just basically here to affirm things for those people out there that don't have a voice, that aren't able to speak for themselves. And that, you know, it's like the girl that you interviewed from the
Yeah.
Children's Services the other day, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Lala.
She was awesome, that girl.
Mhm.
But most
No.
of those people don't have any voice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you guys give her a voice.
Yeah.
So that's really what this is all about. And that's why, if you notice, like if you look up targeted individual, you're going to get hit on the first page of Google. Oh, they're all crazy. They're insane. They're
Yeah.
paranoid. They're schizophrenic. That's typical, man. Like now we're starting to become more savvy as a nation, as a culture, that, oh, wait a second. If they're ganging up on these people, then maybe there's something to it. And I've
That's right.
noticed people changing like that, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's because they said all of these people think the government's trying to get them. Well, after Snowden and Vault 7, guess what? The
Yeah, they
government's
are.
trying to get you.
Is.
No.
I always have to edit so much with you, Steve. I don't know why.
Hey, are we all going to get
And then we'll
together
do
in
this.
Texas?
I
It's
think
the
that's
Rays,
gonna-
man. I mean, the Rays are like,
That's gonna
Hang on a second.